In today's video, I won't be covering any of the steps that were done in the previous Elucidian Starstriders video, such as how I painted the flesh, eyes, hair, clothing, leathers, or metallic bits. If you want to see how I painted those parts, take a look at the video linked in the top right corner of your screen now, or alternatively, it's also linked in the description. Today I'll be looking at finishing the remaining 5 members of this kill team, specifically the various details that set them apart from the other 5. Most of the parts of these miniatures were base coated with speed paints, and for the feathers there were 4 speed paints that were used, being 2 blues, a purple, and a red. I then highlighted each of these 4 sections 3 times, reducing the area highlighted with each brighter color. The paints I used are pretty thin, so I drugged them over the other colors to slightly blend them together, but I didn't spend a lot of time on it. There isn't anything fancy here, just a base coat and 3 highlights. To keep the runtime of this video short, I'm only showing the painting of the light blue feathers, but the other sections of feathers were painted following the same steps, albeit with different colors. For the monocles, glasses, and Rejuvenat shoulder thing that I painted orange, I did these in 3 steps. I started playing with inks on these 5 models, and we're done with a base coat of white ink, followed by a bright orange ink. Finally, I placed an outer rim of red ink around the borders. Inks are very runny, but if you don't overload your brush, they are surprisingly easy to work with, and their coverage, even the transparent ones, can sometimes be surprising. For the blue monocle, I painted this using a turquoise ink directly over a silver base coat. I then applied a crescent-shaped highlight of a very light blue, followed by a smaller crescent highlight of white. Now, for what I feel is the worst part of everything done by me painting this kill team. For Elucia Vhane, I originally painted her clothing black because I had it in my head that I wanted to pair her up as an homage to one of my favorite WCW wrestlers, the chairman of the board, the Reaper himself, La Parka. Unfortunately, when I finally got to trying to paint the bone designs on her, I realized there wasn't enough real estate to paint this within. I could put some forearm and shin bones on and some of the toe bones, but her hips and torso were too obscured by the gold filigree. What I should have done, in retrospect, was to use an X-Acto knife and cut away all of the gold filigree on her torso, and cut away the panther, then smooth it down with sanding sticks. I also considered leaving it as it is, but the black hood was looking a little too much like Cobra Commander, and if she hadn't had the hat, I would have straight painted on the Cobra emblem on her forehead. Instead, I did a hybrid of these ideas and settled for trying to paint a half skull on her hood. I did this by stippling on a muddy brown, followed by a brighter brown, black for the nostril holes, and then an off-white as a final highlight. I then went back and forth between these 4 colors several times until I had something I was happy-ish with. Oddly enough, the more I look at it, it's not as bad as I initially thought. I think the main issue is the hat. If I imagine the upper part of the skull above and around her eyes, then I can see the half skull and it's not so terrible. Ultimately, I feel like only having the 1/3 of the skull being present is the problem. Moving on to the katana, I applied a base coat of plasmatic bolt speed paint. I then thinned down a turquoise paint and glazed it in the shadows over multiple light applications, letting each glaze fully dry before adding the next. I followed the same pattern for the first highlight, adding multiple glaze applications with each drying before applying the next. I also added an edge highlight all over the blade. For the final highlight, I applied this more as thin lines to represent glints of light as well as a thin broken edge highlight. When I apply the glints to the upper part of the blade, I offset it slightly from the lower hand to help demonstrate the blade is angled differently on the sharpened face. I finished the highlights with a mild stippling to brighten up some of the large highlights slightly. For the vials on the Rejuvenat, I return to the inks and apply a base coat of white over each of the vials in what I imagine is a collection device, where she has been storing the juices taken from the chaos-tainted abominations, for she is one of the few skirting heresy, by seeing value in studying the horrors in order to learn and better exterminate them. I then paint the lower half of the vials with green ink and the upper half with blue ink, before highlighting about 50% of them with a light blue and a light green over their respective colors. I finished the vials with thin lines of white across the top and some parallel reflections to help shape the cylindrical shape of the glass. For the power cores, I tried multiple things but was ultimately unhappy with them, so I'll just show you what I ended up deciding on, starting with an application of white ink. And once dry, I follow with a bright orange ink. I then head outside to my airbrushing station to finish the rest by thinning down the same orange ink with some airbrush thinner and gently apply this in a couple short controlled bursts. I was careful to test on the painting handle to see how it was coming out before I sprayed it on the miniatures. I only wanted to brighten it up just a little and get a little bit of orange spray around the glowing source and onto the golden metallics. I then do the same for all the other areas I had used orange ink on, as well as to apply a slight OSL effect. I then thin some yellow ink in the same manner and apply this in a few places where I had yellow light, as well as over the Death Cult Assassin's eyes. I was originally going to include the bases in this video, but I decided to hold off on doing those, and they'll have their own short video coming later. Long story short, I purchased some new basing materials and I want to try those out on these miniatures, so for now, I'll call it a night. And this is where I stopped. I really like how each of these 5 miniatures came out, but I'm less happy with how the leader of the kill team, Elucia Vhane, ended. I think this is mainly due to my disappointment from setting high goals and then not meeting them even in the slightest. I particularly like how the Death Cult Executioner came out, however. For lessons learned, and oh, there are so many. First, as mentioned several times in this video, I bit off more than I could chew on Elucia Vhane. The ideas were sound, but the prep work that would have been required to pull it off was not something I was expecting nor prepared for. The half skull would have been fine if it wasn't for the hat, making the skull look too incomplete and literally looks like someone pie-faced her, with an actual pie. I also have some disappointments with how parts of some of the flesh has come out, particularly the unsmooth highlights on the Lectro-Maester and the faces on the Voidsmen excluding the Voidmaster. Another hurdle on this project is that I need to figure out how to have a smoother finish with Speedpaints, or I need to just stop using them. I spend too much time smoothing out blotches, and it'd be faster to just base coat it in basic acrylics. I do like how the Canid came out, but maybe it's just me, but I can't take this dog as a serious threat. Probably because I base coated originally in Beowulf Blue, which has set the precedence of me only being able to see Dino Mutt every time I see it. Which I know that doesn't make sense, Dino Mutt isn't even blue, but maybe I have it associated with the blue from Blue Falcon. There are also some bad spots that I thought I did a good enough job on gap filling, such as the sides of the Lectro-Maester's lower torso and Elucia Vhane's shoulder guards, and is definitely something I need to be more cognizant about. I also missed a mold line on the Chaos Spawnling's head under the Rejuvenat's foot. And that'll bring this video to its end. I hope you learned something or inspired to start or expand your own collection of Warhammer 40k kill teams. If you have any questions, feel free to ask, and if you like the content of this video and would like to see more, you can easily support the channel by liking, commenting, sharing, and subscribing. I'm Jim with Workaway Miniatures. I'm truly grateful for your time, and I bid you a fond farewell. Until the next video.